DeepSeek and more conversations about DPI, how DPI can be used for the global south, and how it can be used for climate, there's one question that kind of, while you were talking, struck me quite a bit. You were saying, we want to make sure that we use AI to make life better. That's pretty counterintuitive, because at the moment, AI has been used mostly to make some people richer. So this is something where, how do you explain this logic? And maybe adjacent to that, a question, there's a lot of enthusiasm here about the adoption of technology. You said, because everything else has been so much worse, this is great, we'll use this. What would be a breaking point for India to curb that enthusiasm? What would be a technological development that might bring this to a screeching halt? Because there's an endangering of data, there is a big fear about a real corruption of the entire system.
You're from Europe, right?
I am, yes, I can't help it. The skeptics always come from Europe.
Yeah. So, I think, obviously there are these risks, and the risks are well known. I mean, security is a big risk. Data privacy is a big risk. With AI, of course, the world coming to an end is a big risk, according to these guys. So there are lots of risks. But I think we have to manage the risks. There will be some episodes, something that set us back. But at the end of the day, the incredible benefit that people are getting from this technology far subsumes the risks. And that's the reality, I think. The minister was also saying that today you have a lady sitting on a street with a street vendor with a cart. She's selling vegetables. She's using UPI payments. And then she's using the data from those payments to get access to credit. So for her, it's life-changing. So I think that's what will keep it going. And your first question was?
So just the question of whether sort of the logic, the underlying logic here is not to get rich because the state has played a lot of the role in underlying this.
Actually, state has played a role of creating minimal guardrails and technologies. But the rest of it is actually market innovation. If you look at what's happening in the DPI world today, there are many, many companies. I'll give you examples of those companies like PhonePe and all these guys. All these guys use the infrastructure, but they're private companies. And the market value of companies created on top of India's digital infrastructure is $150 billion, so it's not small. So the idea is create rails which everybody uses, and then allow markets to compete. So it's not a government thing in that sense.
No, but the rails do cost money, and they do cost capital. And at the moment, if we want to talk about adoption also in the Global South, capital for precisely those investments is not necessarily available with other actors, particularly the United States, pulling back.
Actually, the money is not the bottleneck. I mean, the money to build DPI globally will just cost a few $1 billion. It's not much. You want to fix global debt, you need $1 trillion. You want to fix global climate, you need $5 trillion. So compared to all that, if you want to create digital infrastructure for the globe, it'll cost $10 billion. It's not much at all.
And there's no hardware needed before?
No, you need hardware. You have to buy the hardware, but you have to buy it, or you can use the cloud or whatever. So I don't think it's a technology problem, because the technology has been demonstrated. Much of this technology is available as open source with no strings attached, so there's no sovereignty issue. It is really political will, understanding how tech can be transformational. That is where that's where we have to think about it, and not get seduced by some AI and this and that. And, these are all good things, but AI is like talking about the penthouse when you don't have a foundation. So I think we need to build a foundation in these countries.
Well, we're talking about price. Let's go to DeepSeek, because this has been on everybody's mind. How much has this shaken the tech ecosystem here? You're one of the godfathers of the Indian tech ecosystem. What was your first thought when you saw this coming out?
No, I think DeepSeek has done a service to the world. I think they've demonstrated that you can do frugal innovation, that even if you're constrained in capital or constrained in the quality of your chips, if you design it and innovate well, you can create a comparable AI to other people who spend billions of dollars. So I think they have demonstrated that. And the second thing that DeepSeek has done is they have published what they have done. So they've been very, very, in general, the AI world typically has been open about its achievements. I mean, even the Transformer came out of a paper from Google in 2017. But I think DeepSeek has, in that spirit, has published all the techniques they used. So ultimately, what it's saying is models will be commodities. Anybody can build a model. It's not a big deal. All the knowledge is out there. it's the data which makes the difference. So it's, if we have to change the focus, how do we gather the data from the direct raw data, not from some internet scraping? How do we use synthetic data? How do we build use cases which then give more data to solve and so on? So it's a data issue. I'm not really concerned about the models. If anybody can build models.
But are you worried about DeepSeek as such? Sorry to be the European again here, but the Italians have banned DeepSeek already. Your own finance ministry has said, not using on government devices, please. So what is the risk that is behind it if this is the basis, a foundational model for more applications?
I don't care whether you use DeepSeek or not. All I'm saying is that what DeepSeek has done is accelerated the commoditization of models. So you don't use DeepSeek, use something else.
But do you think that India will have the next 5 DeepSeek moments as it was discussed here?
Well, I don't know what is a DeepSeek moment. There will be models from here, and the Indian AI mission has already launched a plan for more Indians to build AI models. Already many people have launched small models, 2 billion parameters, 7 billion parameters. Now it's a question of scaling it up. As part of the AI mission, they've also struck a deal to get GPU capacity in the country. So I think all the right things are done. All I'm saying is we should not lose sleep because somebody hasn't built a model. Because models will be built. It's not a big deal. The real challenge, as I explained in my talk, is how do we make this work? How do you make it work for 1 billion people? How do you make sure it's accurate? How do you make sure there's no bias? How do you make sure that it doesn't goof off? That is the problem. So we'll focus on those things. Tomorrow, if some new model comes, we'll just replace the old one with a new one. Not a big deal.
I like your optimism, and I like also that you say it's not a big deal. It gives us, consoles us in Europe as well, since we're sort of behind on that one as well. We're not quite sure. Maybe a quick question on sort of the Global South perspective here, because there's a lot of participants from Global South countries here in the room, and this is obviously the great India story, right? The DPI story is the great India story. But what is it that Global South countries really need right now? What is it that India can offer? And is this something where India will also sort of get out of its shell a little bit and go into the world and actually promote this more actively? What would be the collaboration partners for that?
Well, I'm not in the government, so I can't speak for that. But I think there is a lot to learn from the Indian example. First is, how do you use tech in an inclusive way? How do you get everyone to participate? When we give 1.4 billion Indians an Aadhaar, when we have 750 million Aadhaar-linked bank accounts, when we have billion smartphones, we've actually taken this technology to everyone right down to the last point. That is something which everyone can learn from. That is not just for a small elite, but it's a very inclusive way of doing things. So there's a whole set of learnings there. The second thing is most of the Global South has a very high degree of informalization. So formalization is just a few people, and the rest of the people are outside the system. And tech done well can actually accelerate formalization, which is what is happening in India today. Formalization in turn means more people enter the economic system, they improve their productivity, they earn money, they pay taxes. So the whole virtuous cycle that the West took 150 years can be accelerated into 20, 30 years. And many more things, and then the way we think about AI for learning, the huge challenge in many of these countries is just children are not learning. If we can now make learning better, that will have a huge impact on the human capital. So I can think of a dozen things which will benefit, and they're not that expensive compared to all the other costs the world is going through.
You're going around the world a lot talking about this. Where are the places where you find the adaptation most sort of imminent? Where do you see the biggest strides forward at the moment?
I think certainly in Africa, in fact, we have the gentleman here from Morocco who's talking about what they've done in Morocco and many other countries, South Africa, Kenya, and so on, in the Philippines and in South America and so on, all that. And interestingly, lo and behold, yesterday I had a meeting with a Western European country.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, there's a lot that can be done. I'm from Berlin, where a lot of the digitalization is still kind of very far behind.
Yes. So I think the big change I see today is there's now finally acknowledgement that in India, actually, it's a whole new way of doing things. It's much more participative, it's much more open, it's much more open source, and more countries are now looking at it, including what are developed countries.
And do you think that from that perspective, sort of, what are the other use cases? And I would like to sort of tilt the conversation a little bit for our stretch here. to the climate conversation.
Sure.
Because there's something that is very dear to my heart, but I know also dear to your heart, to have a conversation about that. And we're at a time where the climate conversation has obviously, is not making the top of the priority list, although arguably it probably still should, despite everything that's going on at the moment. But there's obviously a huge need in having conversations about what do new solutions for the climate problems look like. Technology is one of the areas that we look towards and say, maybe that can solve us, maybe that can save us, maybe that can help us. How do you see the combination of DPI, AI, and climate come together? What would be the best use cases from your perspective?
Sure, I think that's a great question. And first of all, I think many of the challenges in climate today, one is of course the political policy, lack of carbon tax, those kind of things, are also just the sheer complexity of implementation. Today, everywhere in the world, it takes years to get permission to do anything, to build a solar plant, to lay the transmission line. So the interconnect backlog around the world is huge. It's not a tech problem. It's a problem that our policy framework. See, what happened what's happening is today we are in the age of electricity, right? Because more and more we're going to go to electricity for a variety of reasons and less on fossil fuels. In the Western world, electricity consumption was pretty much static for 100 years. And the technology did not change for 150 years. The last time the grid had technology was in 1880, when Tesla, Edison, and Westinghouse fought whether it should be AC or DC, right? After that, it's been the same stuff. So when you have a static system which is not growing, suddenly you're made it extremely dynamic and growing at 5%. You're not able to cope. So a lot of it is nothing to do with technology. It's to do with whether we can actually grow, build more transformers, put the cables, get it going, get the permissions, etc. So I think that part is required in climate, irrespective of that. But the other thing is that the nature of electricity is changing from a large single producer of energy, like a nuclear plant or a big gas-fired plant, to a situation where every home has energy in it. Every home has a EV, which has a battery. Every home has a rooftop solar. Every home has many more electric devices, heat pumps and ACs and so on. So you're going from a sort of a mainframe kind of world to an internet kind of world where everyone is a producer, consumer, buyer, seller, or storer of energy. This requires a whole new way of thinking about the grid and the way of connecting. And that's where DPI comes in. My point is that you can have a DPI approach to creating tomorrow's grid by creating protocols which allow all these guys to talk to each other seamlessly, which is what, by the way, the paper that we have published called the Digital Energy Grid, which explains how this could happen. So this is a classic example of how climate, because energy transition is required for climate. Energy transition can be accelerated by making the grid much more interoperable. For that, you need a protocol. That's a DPI. And then once you do that, the data collection becomes so simpler, that provides the AI to do many things. So I think that's the climate, energy, DPI, AI connection.
So walk me through this. I'm a 25-year-old entrepreneur from Europe. I want to make money off of that idea. How would I make a business out of this?
Well, it depends. You look at a specific thing. For example, somebody may say, I want to be in the business of peer-to-peer trading. I want to create a small smart grid in my village and actually produce solar energy, buy it and sell it. And if I have surplus energy, I sell it to the grid. So somebody can build a solution for that. Or somebody can say, how do I create a interoperable charging app so that instead of today, there'll be 10 charging networks and each will have their own app, where you actually need to have a way to make it interoperable, like we did UPI in India. So how do you make it interoperable? So there's the market for that, and so on. I mean, there's a whole market for creating distributed cloud storage. So what's going to happen is, many times, for example, once the EV life is over, that battery is still useful not to make the EV travel, but as a stationary storage for electricity. Somebody could get second-hand batteries, gets sustainability, all that stuff, create a network of second-hand batteries which become storage, so when there's surplus energy, it can be stored there. Remember that at the rate we are going, the combined capacity of storage of EVs batteries is 6 times what it will be on the grid. So we have to leverage that distributed capacity. So how do you create a cloud storage for that? So I mean, I don't want to get into being
there are endless opportunities.
Oh,
you're
yeah.
basically saying that.
But you have to agree to work on a single global, or at least a protocol. Now, think about it. Just let's do a mind game. Let's go back 30 years, 40 years, whatever. In 1995, why did the internet take off so fast? It was because long before that, they had built the protocols for the internet. They had built, the way to send emails, or the way to do a website, and so on, right? And then you could just build on that. But the new world of energy doesn't have those protocols. So you're going to do, if you don't do it properly, you'll also have these point solutions. So if you can use this properly and create a unifying protocol for the world, then it'll accelerate, and you'll get all that you want.
Where do you see this as a really live debate here in India at the moment? Because I think this is where there's often a question about collaboration between Europe, the West more broadly, and India on climate questions. There's always a bit of a bad sentiment because the conversations at the COP aren't going so well and things like that.
No.
Is that an area where you see a real area for collaboration between Europe and India as well?
Absolutely. I mean, look, if you're arguing about who pays how much money, or if you're arguing saying stop using coal, that's not going to go very far. But if you're saying let's look at how to use digital transformation as a way of accelerating the energy transition, which in turn will benefit the climate, that's a very positive conversation that we can have.
I would like to sort of walk you a little bit back to the year 2016, where you said in many interviews before that was sort of the crucial year for India's digital journey. This is now more than 10 years ago. If you
9 years ago. 9 years ago.
So it's almost 10 years ago, exactly. Almost 10 years ago now. So if you have the anniversary next year, what will it be that you look back on and will be saying, what enabled it? What enabled 2016, made it so possible? And what is your advice for every single other Global South country going through that evolution, how they can create their own 2016 in 2025?
So first, I'll tell you what happened in 2016. April 4th, 2016, Aadhaar reached 1 billion people. April 11, 2016, UPI was launched. September 2nd, 2016, the architecture for account aggregator was launched by the RBI, which is the basis of democratizing data. September 5th, 2016, Reliance Jio was launched, which changed the mobile business. November 8, 2016 was the withdrawal of currency notes, also known as demonetization. And December 30th, 2016, the PM launched the Bhim app. So in the space of 9 months, this thing happened. But for this to happen, things had to have happened before. It's not that one morning we got up and all this happened. It was all developing over the previous few years. So I think the message is that you have to have the patience to build the basic foundational blocks to take this forward. It may take years. But if you do it well, then events will happen, events will conspire to take all these blocks and get them to scale up. So I think there's hope for everyone. And this time we can do it much faster, because we know what we have to do. That time we didn't know what we were doing. Now we know what we're doing, so we can do it faster.
You've also said that India will have 1 million startups in just 10 years.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
So where do you see, what's the area in which you will have most startups?
In everything. I mean, there's no one area. All startups will be solving some problem or the other. The important thing, there'll be 1 million of them. Like, to give you again, in 2015, we had about a few thousand startups. Today, we have 150,000 startups. So assuming a 20% CAGR, we're looking at 1 million startups by 2035. And it's a virtuous cycle. Startups beget more startups. It's like nuclear fission or whatever. So let's see what happens. There's a startup, bunch of very smart guys. They create a successful company. They go IPO. All those guys have stock options. They all make millions. They all become startup guys. Suddenly, one startup begets 100 more startups. So that cycle, that virtuous cycle is now in full play, which is why I think there'll be 1 million. Now, which problems they will solve is for them, but they will solve problems in climate, in energy, in fintech, in space. I mean, India's space story is actually a fabulous success story. I mean, 10 years back, India was essentially a public sector success space story. ISRO was doing everything. But this government, Mr. Jaishankar and his colleagues, Prime Minister Modi came out with the space policy, which allowed private sector to do space. That has now led to hundreds of space startups. And today we have startups like Skyroot in Hyderabad, which is building a 3D rocket for launching. They're going to be launching, every 2-3 months they're going to be launching. So there'll be one of the few places outside the US where there'll be launches. There's a company like Pixel, which is launching hyperspectral satellites, which there are 3 of them flying now, beaming data down. So suddenly the space industry has taken off. And these guys are benefiting from the infrastructure of ISRO. So they use the rocket launching in Kerala, where they have the launching pad for ISRO. And they use the labs of ISRO for testing. So there's a good synergy between the private startups and the existing system. So who would have thought? I mean, I never thought 10 years back that space would be a big thing. But now there are 200 startups. So I don't know where it's going to come from.
Where does the capital come from? Do you think mainly from India, or do you think from the outside?
Both. I mean, the global capital will come, but Indian capital, see, only 5% of Indian assets are in equity right now. So that's going to go up. And we also have systematic investment plans where people invest a small amount of money in capital markets. That today is now $3 billion a month. So we're getting $36 billion a year into our capital markets through technology, because you just press a button and it sets it up. In 2 minutes, you can set it up. You're welcome. I'll show it to you sometime. So the thing is that capital will come from outside and from India.
I think that's an important sort of note, because I think there's a lot of skepticism at the moment whether capital will dry up for certain developments, because we're all now in defense production and we're all investing in other things and no one's investing in those things anymore. But there's no skepticism on your part here.
No, look, I mean, I think India's challenge, while I know this is all about geopolitics and all that stuff, India's challenges are internal. In the sense, what we have to do to get our thing going is internal. It's not, we have to deal with all the external issues, of course. I mean, nobody's saying no, but a lot of things, improving ease of doing business, making benefits universal, making credentials universal, getting the startup guys going, it's really within the country.
So while we're coming to a close, I started as the skeptical European, and you almost have me convinced to embrace the sort of Indian enthusiasm.
What else do I need to do to change you?
This is my question, is sort of, what is your piece of advice for all those skeptical Europeans out there to just get a little bit more Indian about themselves?
Develop a bias for action.
That's a tricky one for a German. Thank you so much, Nandan Nilekani, for this conversation. It's been a huge pleasure. Thank you for Carnegie India for organizing everything, and I hope that all of you